Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie paper and ink, and for today's card I am using this penny black flower Cascade stamp that I had gotten a haul months ago. It's been in the back of my mind for a while now. I've been wanting to use it, and right now Kathy Rakusen's 30-day coloring challenge is going on, and it's just a prompt to spend time every day coloring, and I always just gravitate towards florals, especially this time of year when here in Saskatchewan it's generally kind of cold and snowy and slowly starting to warm up. So anyway, I wanted to use this image, so I started with some Strathmore ready cut watercolor paper, and it's cut already to 5 by 7 inches. So I took the die that I was planning on using, which is from the MFT Wonky Stitched rectangle set, and I traced out the outer perimeter of the die onto this paper so that I knew where I'd be die cutting so that I could stamp the image where I wanted it. And I used the Misty to stamp it, and I had treated the watercolor paper with my anti-static powder tool first, and then I inked up the stamp with Versamark ink, and then closed the lid of the Misty to stamp that onto the watercolor paper. And then I'm coating it with some detail white embossing powder, and then heating it with my heat tool. And always when I'm embossing white on white, I always end up having to tilt it into the light to make sure there's no grainy areas, that everything is shiny, which means it's all melted, because even I can't generally see it, and you can't see it at all hardly on camera. So once everything's melted, I'm going to tape this down to some hardboard because I was planning on just experimenting with my watercolors, and I had a feeling I'd probably be using a lot of water, so I'm just using some painter's tape. That's another reason why I just traced out the rectangle die, because then I have all that extra space where I can tape things down. I don't have to worry about it. And then for this image today, I decided to use my Sakura Koi watercolors because I haven't used these in a while. So I pulled these out, and then one of my silver brushes, this is a size 4 brush, and some water. And I just start laying in color. So I super sped this up because I also didn't realize, because when I was filming this, it was in about the brightest part of the day, and I'm filming in natural light and it's really, really bright. So it kind of washes out all this watercoloring that I did. So I just kind of super sped it up, but I just went in and started off with just a really light layer of color, and then started experimenting and adding a bit more in here and there as everything was drying, which is something I don't do very often. But I thought, you know what, why not? Let's do a little bit of experimenting. So I took my time with this. In the end, it took me about maybe 20 minutes or so to watercolor this image in. I'm not even exactly sure, but the kids were napping. It was quiet. It was just one of those few times where I kind of actually just sit down and basically just play. So I ended up doing about 3 layers of color altogether on these images, and I did the little main flower just in some pink, and then the roses I did with yellow, and then I tinted the edges of the rose with that same pink, and then did some purples for the smaller flowers, a couple shades of green for all the leaves. And then as I was doing all this, I'm like, I should have done the background first. I should have done a wash of color for the background first, but I'm like, I normally don't do that with watercolor. I'm so used to going in and adding, background or around the edges at the end. So that's what I did here. Is I done some in a really light wash of green along the edges. And then I went in and with a really watered down black, so it was just a light gray you can see here. I went around the edges some more just to add a little bit more definition and to just make that white heat embossing pop. And then when everything was completely dry, I mixed up the pink again and got it on my brush, and then just tapped my brush against my fingers just to give it a little bit of splatter. And same thing, let that dry completely before I remove the tape and do anything else so I don't smear anything. So it's all dry, I've removed the tape. Now I can line this back up with that Wonky Stitched rectangle die and run it through my Big Shot, which is also the nice thing about tracing it out, is I know exactly where I'm going to place this die. So line it up with those pencil marks that I had made, and I can run this through my machine, and then it's all die cut, and it's got all that fun little stitching all around the edges. And while I had my Big Shot out, I had a scrap of this same watercolor paper, so I ran it through my machine again with this Loved die, which is from Tailored Expressions. It's the Loved script die. So I die cut that from the watercolor paper. My original plan, I was going to just die cut from white cardstock, use some distress inks, do some sponging, but I'm like, I have this scrap of paper, the watercolor's already out, why not do it this way? So I left the die in the scrap, or the die cut in the scrap of watercolor paper here, and then just got it wet and created my own little kind of ombre wash with the pink and the yellow watercolor. So just painted that over. I was kind of liberal with the water, but this watercolor paper handles it quite nicely, I think. And once I was happy with it, I'm going to I'm going to dry it with my heat tool just because I didn't want it to curl too much. And once it's completely dry, I can then pop it out of my cardstock, and then I die cut it 2 more times from just some grout gray cardstock from MFT. Again, only it was actually sitting right here from a previous card. But I just thought, I was like, oh, the gray would be just better than like a harsh white. So I die cut that twice from the grout gray, stacked those together with my multi-medium matte adhesive. I've had a lot of people asking lately about that applicator tip on my adhesive because theirs didn't come with it. It is a separate purchase. I always link to it right next to the adhesive. It's just a separate bottle with this fine metal applicator tip. And I just take the applicator tip off the empty bottle and put it onto my multi-medium matte, and I just love it that way. I do have to unclog it frequently. It does clog up on me, but for me, it's still worth it. I just have a few pins. I have a little pin cushion right on my desk, and I just use that to unclog it, and it works just fine. So I did that, and then I stamped a sentiment from the Taylor Expressions How Sweet It Is stamp set onto some vellum with the same Versamark ink, used the same detail white embossing powder. And then once I had that stamped and melted with my heat tool, I used my paper trimmer just to trim that down. So that way it was easier to, I had thought about just stamping it directly onto this piece and embossing it, but I thought, one, the vellum would help the sentiment to stand out a little bit more. Plus it gave me the freedom of like putting the sentiment exactly where I wanted it to be. So I didn't have to mess around with it or anything. So I just wrapped that around the watercolor piece and then taped it into place with some Scotch tape. And then applied more multimedia matte adhesive to the back of my die cut. And then I'm going to press that into place right below the vellum sentiment. So get that all completely pressed into place and then let it dry. And then for my card base, I decided instead of my standard go-to, which is usually just a white card base, I grabbed some lemon chiffon cardstock from MFT, just this really pretty pale yellow. And cut the cardstock in half lengthwise, so it's 4 1/4 by 11 inches, and then I scored it at 5 1/2 inches with my Teflon bone folder. So this will be a top folding A2 sized card. And before I do anything else, I'm going to put this into the MISTI again, and this time I'm going to line up this stamp on the inside of my card, and I'm going to ink it up with some Memento Cantaloupe ink, which is just another light yellow ink, and make sure to use my MISTI for that because I wanted to make sure I stamped it perfectly on the inside. I decided not to add any sentiments or anything, just to stamp this flower cascade again with the yellow ink. So it's easy to write over. If you have like a longer message to the recipient, you can just write over this with a ballpoint pen and it's just fine. So got that stamped, so then I can adhere the watercolor piece to the front of the card, and I decided to use foam tape for that, so it's popped up off the card. And then once I got that adhered, I pulled out these new, these are sparkling crystals from Studio Katya, which I'd shown again in like a Happy Meal haul. They'd sent them to me, and these are like absolutely gorgeous. At first I thought they were sequins, but then when I like actually poured them out, it's like, oh, they're almost like little rhinestones. They're so pretty. And again, the light kind of washes them out. You can see them better in the picture at the end of the video, but these are just so pretty. They're faceted and completely clear, just gorgeous. And they come in, I think, 3 sizes in this pack, like a really, really tiny one. Like, I think it's like 3, 4, and 5 millimeters, something like that. So they're just gorgeous. So I adhered a bunch of those with my Crystal Katana and the multimedia matte adhesive, and that finished off my card. So I will have a link below the video to my blog post with the pictures as well as links to all the supplies used. So check that out below if you are interested. And thank you all so much for watching, subscribing, thumbs upping, and commenting on my videos. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.